But let's start Lions, and what'd you take out of that game?
First off, obviously we all have rooting interest, but even if you were just watching that, like that was just such a really good football game. You know what I mean? Between two really good teams, two really well-coached teams, four, I think, of the top coordinators in this league with both your guys and O'Connell and with Brian Flores. And I thought it was a gutty performance. You know, I had the feeling, you know, a couple series in, I think you're kind of looking at each other like, oh boy, it's not going to be one of these days, is it? Yeah. You know, like we had in Baltimore last year where everything went wrong. And then just to watch that team just rebound and just not give up and just come back and say, all right, we took your punch. You know, we know you're coming off a bye. You're probably a little fresher than we are. Now we're going to start rolling, right? And then they answered in a big way and played complimentary football. And I think the biggest part for me was the way you finished that game. You needed all three phases, starting with the Jack Fox punt. That was a booming punt to knock Minnesota back to about their 20-yard line. You needed your defense. You had to have it. We had to get a stop. They go out there, find a way to get a 3-and-out, and then offense clearly got to have a drive, right? This is it. We got one last chance. You get down there, and then you cap it off with special teams again. So just the way that all three phases performed, you know, with the last 5 minutes of that game, that's a sign of a really damn good football team, man. And they look like they're having fun too. You know what I mean? Like they don't. I know Coach said they don't bat an eye. They really don't. They don't flinch. The defense goes out and has a couple rough series. Offense, like, hey, don't worry, we got your back. Offense, we start with 3, bad drives. Defense, like, okay, we're gonna hang in there, man. We're gonna keep punching. We're gonna keep battling. We know you guys are gonna get rolling here pretty soon. So it's such a fun team to watch. And I thought it was a fitting end, with Nowaski getting the sack.
Yeah.
After much was made about the pass rush all week. And look, I mean, was it as good as it has been with Hutch? Probably not, but I thought there were some areas that were improved. Sometimes where they were pressuring or guys getting pressure up the middle. DJ Reader had a couple nice rushes. Aleem had a couple nice rushes. I thought Houston probably didn't show up on the stat sheet, but had a couple moments where he was getting pressure and forcing Sam Darnold to kind of get outside the pocket and take his eyes off of maybe the guys he wanted to throw to. So I just thought it was a gutty win. I thought it was really impressive, and I thought it was a really damn good football team between two of probably the best teams in the league.
How repeatable is it? Now, obviously, no one's going to be stressing about the Titans, but in 2 weeks they got Green Bay. How repeatable is it with not as much pass rush as they had with Aiden Hutchinson moving forward?
Well, I think that Aaron Glenn is going to have to continue to have multiple schemes. You know what I mean? I think he's got to adapt to each opponent that you're going to play. Green Bay and Minnesota are not the same offense. Green Bay has probably a better passing attack, more guys that they can get involved. It's just different, right? Different style of quarterback. So I think you're going to have to come up with different plans for each team. But that was one thing we talked about last week is what's the defense going to look like? I mean, they've pretty much been lining up rush for press man coverage. Okay, you lose one of the best pass rushers in the world. Are we going to do that? Are we going to change things up? I thought there were some wrinkles in there where lining up odd fronts and under fronts and jam fronts and, stuff that you really haven't shown on film throughout the first 5 weeks that were to your advantage. I think you were able to generate some pressure that way. And that's kind of how Minnesota does it too. I think Decker got beat once in that game around the edge. Mm-hmm. Goff didn't really have room to step up. But other than that, it seemed like all the pressures were, hey, man, they're stunting, they're blitzing, they're twisting, they're doing all this stuff. And it's just hard to communicate that way. So I think if your defense can kind of take some of that and help your guys, come around free, get some free edge rushers, get some free guys up the middle, it's going to continue to create opportunities to make big plays.
To your point about Glenn, they blitzed the second most of any game he's coached here in Detroit, 57% of the time, 20 of the 35 dropbacks. So this was clearly something he said, hey, I got to find a way to manufacture pressure. Early in the game, those blitzes weren't getting home. Late in the game, they did. When they didn't blitz, here's the stat that's going to be concerning for Lions fans. When they didn't blitz, edge rushers generated pressure on just 3 of 27 rushes for the game. That's not good enough. on islands, when you don't blitz, those guys aren't winning.
Yeah.
So what does that say about their need to do something in the next couple weeks here?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I was thinking about that driving in, but you came out and you won the game yesterday. That's obviously the first goal.
Yeah.
Defense played good enough, right? You really let up.
Of course.
22 points? I mean, yeah, their defense scored, so low 20s. So you can live with that, right? You can say, okay, we can live with this as long as we keep them out of the end zone and we keep getting stops in the red zone. That's our style of defense. But I honestly, the urgency to go get somebody, right? Is it higher or lower than where we were sitting on Friday? Like, that's the question.
Right.
I think you can make the argument for both. You could say, well, we didn't have Aiden Hutchinson and we just beat what was, an undefeated team, one of the best teams in the NFC.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, you can also say, we're this good, is this sustainable to keep doing what we're doing? I think it is against certain teams. But I think that the bigger picture is you look at this and you say, man, we have a damn good football team.
Yeah.
Like, if we could go add one more piece, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's something to be said about, okay, maybe I really do think this is our year, right? And I'm not trying to overreact off of one game, but just the way that the rest of your team looks. You want to do everything you can to help those guys, because after a big win like that, you come out and say, okay, man, like, we might need to go get something.
Well,
right?
Because there's only really one deficiency in what the Lions have as a roster. Because you look offensively, Tim Patrick has filled and answered every question about who you want as your 3 or 4 receiver. Tight end, you're set. Offensive line, you could talk about or have a discussion about depth and maybe adding a backup offensive lineman, and that's way down the road or down the line. The one deficiency, and I asked Jim this question earlier, is there a perfect roster in the NFL at this point, 7 weeks into the season? No, because guys are going to get hurt. I mean, look at Kansas City. They're the only undefeated team left, yet they have no premier receiver. And so, I think Kansas City is looking between now and the trade deadline 2 weeks to add a receiver. The Lions certainly should be kicking the tires on, and maybe watching what they did against Minnesota, maybe it takes the top guys off of the list because they don't want to spend the draft capital that it would take to get them.
Yeah.
But a Zadarius Smith, or I know, last week you mentioned Ojulari with the Giants. There's a Landry with the Titans.
Yeah, you're playing this week, yeah.
There are some guys that you could add that would add production, would add another weapon, another tool for Aaron Glenn.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree with everything you said. And the one thing I think about this team is you might be one of the most complete teams in the NFL. Just across the board. Right,
yeah.
Even without Hutch. But I think there's other teams where if they lose their star player are clearly not. If Minnesota loses Justin Jefferson,
they're done.
They're done, right? And other teams, Kansas City, if they lose Chris Jones,
huge, yeah,
probably done, right? I know Patrick Mahomes is good enough to probably win you some games, but that team doesn't look the same.
Well, they're winning the defense, so it'd be a huge deal.
That's why I think this Lions roster, especially after what we saw yesterday, how complete it feels. You're so close. Do you really want to risk saying, okay, we need to make a move because we're going to continue to put all of it on these other guys? Or do we want to go and just say, you know what? We feel like we are the most complete roster in this team. We know we're hurting at defensive end. We know we're hurting at pass rush a little bit. Let's just go do this thing. You know what I mean? Let's go get it done. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, obviously, I clearly think they wanted to see exactly what they had yesterday before they made any rash decisions. But it'll be interesting to see if there's anything that comes out this week about, maybe we do need to go get something.
It was a good test because Minnesota has a good offensive line.
Yeah.
I'm not going to call them great, but they're good.
Good tackles, yeah. And they had 2 weeks to prepare for that game. Minnesota did, and it's at their place. And you find out what you're made of, like, in the chest. Like, do you have that fight? And this team clearly showed they had the fight. I think they knew that, but it's obvious after yesterday. The fight's there. It's
doubt.
also obvious they don't have enough on the edges right now. So both things can be true, right? Both things can be true. You love the fight, the resilience, the makeup of this locker room, but you also want to your point, do right by the guys in the locker room and give them every chance to win a championship.
Yeah, I would say you don't have enough on the edges right now if you just want to play four-man rush, man defense. You know what I mean?
Sometimes you need to. You can't blitz every
but
play.
that's what I'm saying, unless they want to go the other path to say, you know what, we're going to turn into some exotic-looking team on third down, like what we saw at Minnesota. You don't know who's blitzing, if it's max pressure, max coverage, Right, you know what I mean? So I think it just depends on what their philosophy wants to be moving forward.
And I'll say, if they do blitz more, you got to lean on safeties. They got two good ones. Corners, they're getting better.
And you can more this year. You can
the
more
roster
this year.
does set up more
your
for
corners
that.
set up better. Your secondary. I think Amik Robertson in the slot has been a really good player for them. So, and at heart, I think Aaron Glenn wants to be, a four-man rush, tight man-to-man coverage type of defense. So it'll depend on what their philosophy wants to be moving forward.
248-539-9797. We can get some phone calls in the mix on this. Talk about the Lions offense, the defense, and I think TJ raised a really good question about the pass rush. Do you feel like they need to make a move more after that game or less after that game?